Since 2023, I've mentored over 150 aspiring data analysts. They come from a variety of different backgrounds. Some of them are career changers, some of them are recent grads, and some of them are international students. And over time, I've noticed a pattern. The ones who landed jobs consistently all had 4 common characteristics. So in today's video, I want to talk about what those 4 common traits are, why you should focus on them over anything else, including the perfect resume and the perfect portfolio, and how you can start integrating them into your data journey today. If you're new here, I'm Christine. I'm a former data analyst, eventually became a director of data, and I've worked in industries like tech, healthcare, and consulting. And now I help people take the most direct path to working in data through my mentorship program. On this channel, I share the strategies, frameworks, and the mindset tips to help you become a standout data analyst. A lot of times people think that having the perfect resume, the perfect portfolio, and being able to solve all the problems on LeetCode is going to be what gets them through the door, when it's actually not that at all. The number one skill that I see across every analyst who gets hired quickly is that they are able to confidently and clearly communicate their business impact. Now, this is true even for early career jobs. This is typically what they're looking for in the first few or middle rounds of the interview process. But I know this is really hard to do if you haven't had work experience yet. So I'm going to talk about how to tackle that challenge in a little bit. But just the other day, I was chatting with a hiring manager on LinkedIn who actually approached me to ask why it was so hard for him to find qualified data analysts. And this is what he said. "Hello, my recruiter has called about 60 analysts and I've interviewed 14. I have 3 times open requirements for analysts on new accounts of mine. When I ask how can an analyst add value to a company's decision-making process, applicants don't seem to know how to answer. I think their technical skills are epic, but it's tricky because they struggle with soft skills and confidence, and that translates to inexperience, especially in client-facing roles. I think this is one of the biggest skills that I see aspiring data analysts struggle with. Most people make mistakes where they just give way too much technical detail and completely miss the business context, or they completely miss the data relevant points that a hiring manager or someone who is non-technical would be able to understand. Or they just dive way too into one specific area, not realizing that the main point is to be able to tie your insights to decisions and actual business recommendations. So let's practice this a little bit. In a data context, the most important elements to hit on are what is the data and the actual metrics. So what are the values and the dimensions that you're looking at? What was the business context of this ask or of this project? Who would the stakeholders be who would be using your actual analysis? Even in portfolio projects, it's important to tie your work to a hypothetical stakeholder. And then lastly, what is the actual business impact? And again, it doesn't have to be something super formalized like increasing a metric by a certain percent. Even if it's just helping another team or another person understand something in their data a little bit more, what is that actual impact and how does it actually help them? And all of this needs to be wrapped in confident and clear communication as well as good body language. And just to be clear here, when I say confident communication, that does not mean that you need to be a native speaker in the language that you're interviewing in. I have many students who have English as a second language, and they still do very well in interviews when they practice this and actually nail down this framework. So someone who does not really have polished business communication might explain a project like this. I used Excel to clean data using sales metrics, and I was using XLOOKUPs, if functions, filters, and pivot tables, and then they might go on and on about how they clean the data in Excel. And then I moved the data to BigQuery and used SQL, and I used where statements and joins and window functions, and then they might go on and on about the SQL queries. And then I put the data into Tableau to create visualizations, and I used bar graphs, line graphs, and pie charts to visualize the sales numbers. So what's missing here? There's no context, it's way too tool focused, and it doesn't really explain any impact. This kind of description explains what you did, but not what you actually accomplished and why someone else should care. It's like saying that you used nails and a hammer instead of saying that you built a bookshelf that helps someone save space. So here's how someone with strong business communication would explain the same project. I was working with an e-commerce company in which the sales and the marketing team wanted to better understand how different marketing channels and the marketing budget related to our total sales dollars across different regions and across different products. I first started with data in Excel. The data set was about 108K records, and it mostly had sales and marketing metrics as well as some product dimensions. I was cleaning the data in Excel, doing some initial visualizations just to get a sense of what those top line trends were. When I had a grasp of what I was actually looking for and what metrics I wanted to focus on, I then ported this data over into BigQuery. And I used SQL to write queries to calculate the monthly sales dollars, split by product and split by different regions. Then I moved this data over into Tableau so that I could create a dashboard for the marketing and sales teams to use. And what we found using that dashboard is that there were places where marketing spend was actually really high, but sales was either flat or declining. learning. And so my final recommendation was to investigate those specific regions. This is going to become an increasingly irreplaceable skill, especially in the age of AI. Communication is what creates that final impact. By the way, this is something that I train in my live cohorts, and next month, I'm actually going to be releasing a self-paced version of this course to a group of 30 founding people. And so if you want to be on the waitlist for this, sign up for my newsletter below. Now back to the question about how to build experience before you have experience. You might have seen that many early career data positions say that they require 1 to 2 years of relevant work experience, which then begs the question, well, how does someone really even get into this industry in the first place? This is a big reason why the market feels oversaturated, because many people try to take a jump from a non-data related role straight into a data position, and then they hit their heads against a wall, and then it creates this echo chamber of doom and gloom. But the second most common trait I see of every one of my data analysts who gets hired is that they first build data adjacent experience. And data adjacent experience is just work experience, whether that's paid, unpaid, it's an internship, a fellowship, a volunteer experience, a contract, or freelance work that then positions them one step closer to that dream data role. And they do this by moving into something where they can work with real data, they are using more of the technical tools, and also working with similar kinds of stakeholders that they might encounter on the job. For example, I've seen many students transition from roles that seem non-data related at all. There was one student who was working as a music therapist. She did a fellowship with Blue Bonnet Data, and then she got hired as a market and research analyst. I have another student who was a film and TV production assistant, and he actually did the same thing. He also did the Blue Bonnet Data Fellowship, then got hired as a data engineering intern, and he's actually starting this job this week. Then there have been many students who come from an academic background where they are working in a lab, or they did a PhD in astronomy or biology or something really unrelated to technical work, and then they transition by doing some kind of freelance or contract or volunteer work, which then positioned them as someone who not only has this really strong academic background, but actually is a data analyst who also has the added rigor of coming from a PhD or a master's program. If you're hitting a black box of not hearing back from any of the resumes that you've sent, then think about, are you trying to make too many jumps at once? Are you trying to jump in industry? Are you trying to jump in the technicality of your role, so how data-driven your role is? Are you trying to jump in geography? And are you trying to jump in seniority? Those 4 dimensions, usually if you just try to make one step in the right direction on one of them, that transition will be a lot easier. Now, when it comes to job hunt strategy, none of the data analysts who got hired played a purely numbers game. In fact, the third common trait among hired data analysts is that they often get their first data job through some form of networking. In fact, I think about 50 to 60% of my students who have broken into their first full-time data analyst role did so directly through some form of networking. The only people who get responses from cold applications these days are people who already have highly relevant experience. And so if you're making more of a jump, you need to warm up to the idea of social job hunting. A lot of times students come in feeling really awkward or cringy about the idea of networking. And I get it. You're reaching out to a stranger, you're asking them for something, and it can just feel a little bit desperate. There is a way to do this effectively and authentically. The most effective form of online networking that I've seen usually follows this general set of steps. First, finding a data analyst or someone on the team that you're hoping to get hired at a specific company. So maybe you find a job description on LinkedIn and you find someone who actually works on that team at that company. And you see that that person is still active on LinkedIn. They've had a pulse on LinkedIn at some point in the last 3 months. And so you just send them a short message saying that you're super interested in what they do, how they got into that role, and that you're developing your interests as a data analyst and providing a little bit of insight about your background and how you can bring value to a team. And you just ask for a 15-minute chat. And a lot of times people will actually surprise you. People love sharing about their experiences and talking about themselves. And so in that 15-minute chat, you lead with curiosity. You try to understand their background and also how they got into that role. And at the end of it, you can mention something casual like, I saw that your team is actually hiring for this role. And so if you think I'm a good fit, I would love to just send along my resume. A lot of times these coffee chats won't lead to something immediately, but they usually do 2 things. One, it helps you understand a lot more of the realities of working on the job. And also, we've had many times when people have a coffee chat and they don't really hear back about anything for a few months. And then eventually someone actually reaches back out. And at that point, they already have a connection with you and it kind of speeds along the interview process. I think these days job hunting is becoming much more creative and street smarts of an endeavor. You just cannot keep sending resumes into this black hole and then hope that someone notices. Instead, go right to the decision makers and think about who who is in your network or your secondary network that you can tap into, either for those kinds of, smaller work opportunities or for a connection or an introduction to someone else. So this could be your own friends, it could be friends of parents, it could be a school alumni network. If you were in sororities or frats or college clubs, thinking about where you can access people who have that commonality with you so that you can reach out to them and get the ball rolling in a slightly savvier way. So the last common skill that I see across analysts who get hired is that they know how to nail the take-home assessment. Now, when we think about it, ironically, portfolio projects really actually do not prepare us at all for what we get in the interview process, which is when you're going to have to solve a technical assessment within a certain time limit. Emphasis on within a certain time limit. This is very different than when you have weeks or months to actually dive into one element of your project. And so about 80% of students are interviewing for data analyst jobs. They get a take-home assessment after the second or third round of their interview process. And these take-home assessments usually fall into one of three categories. One is open EDA, so open exploratory data analysis, in which it's like, here's a data set, find some insights and put it together in any deliverable of your choice. The second category is a little bit more specific, where they're testing your data storytelling skills. And they say something like, create a presentation and a set of visualizations to surface insights specifically for these kinds of stakeholders. And then you're actually going to present it to a panel in your third or fourth round interview. And then the last category is technical assessments that are very specific to Excel, SQL, or Python questions. Usually it's Excel or SQL, where you'll actually get an Excel workbook, or you'll get like a Word doc where they ask you questions, and then you have to solve the technical prompts in Excel and show your work and have the formulas, or you have to write queries in the Word doc and then send it back to them or send it in like a private GitHub link. But the main point here is that when you're working on portfolio projects, also have in the back of your mind that one day you might actually have to do this kind of analysis, but within a certain time limit. And so how would you actually practice the things that you're doing in a portfolio project, but be well versed in them enough to be able to do it within a few hours or within a few days? To be honest, this is why I see students usually have to interview with like at least 2 to 3 companies before they actually land that data job when they're going for their first ever data job. Mostly because it takes some time to actually get used to the business communication that I talked about, and also to get past the take-home assessment. Now, as a bonus, a fifth common characteristic is that all the students actually have a really clear narrative about where they're coming from in terms of their previous work experiences and or educational experiences, and how that positions them to be a strong analyst. None of them broke into their first job by having a story like, I studied a PhD, or I worked as a music therapist, and I also like data. And the narrative was always flipped by the time that they started interviewing. So you want to be able to start with a strong sense of, I am a data analyst who also has experiences in these other industries, which has trained me in these specific areas that then will help me become an even better analyst. So at the end of the day, notice that none of the common traits that I talked about here were that these people could write the most complex SQL queries or solve all the questions on Data Lemur. And most of them did not have an advanced degree. So they did not have a master's degree, they did not have a PhD, and many of them didn't even come from an educational background that is anything related to data. And lastly, most of them did not apply to more than 150 positions once they nailed these 4 common traits. Like I mentioned, I am releasing a self-paced version of my live cohort classes that's going to be launched to a small group of founding members. And so if you want to be a part of that, sign up for the waitlist in my newsletter below, and I will see you guys in the next one.